Right, so this is a part of the project concerned as governance and community, and as Helen was saying, there's aspects of qualitative social science research. A number of researchers have been involved in this: Sarah Watmore, Katharina Landström, Eric Sarmiento, Bettina and myself, Christina Kück, Kevin Gregsch, and Chris Decker. Not all of them can be here today, but Bettina as well has been involved in this part of the social science research. So very quickly, there are really three overarching research questions and findings that were addressed in this part of the research. So we started off with the idea that drought governance is another effect of droughts. What do droughts do? Well, they do things as well in the social world. They actually lead to a range of governance arrangements. And so first of all, we ask, well, who actually prevents and manages drought in England and Wales? And it's a deceptively simple question that is difficult and by no means straightforward to answer, also because it's normatively contested who should be responsible for preventing and managing droughts. And we found that in practice really different spaces for governing drought are carved out by regulators, water companies and regulated organizations and citizens. And within these spaces we see variation and who's involved in the networks for preventing and managing droughts. For instance, preventing drought also involves to plan ahead so that sufficient water of sufficient quality is available during an actual drought event. And so in this case, farmers and water companies concerned with reducing water pollution and dedicated programs are actually important actors in that drought governance space. And similarly, where reducing drought risk is understood as harnessing too much water generated during flooding, in that drought governance space, non-governmental organizations and regulators concerned with river management are important actors in that drought governance space. So there's not just one drought governance space, but several overlapping ones. And that illustrates really the challenge of identifying drought as a specific regulatory target. So within these spaces for drought governance, networks of organizations and people make drought governance happen. And we found that in forming these networks, intermediaries, such as environmental consultants, play an important role in further building and disseminating specific understandings on how to govern drought. And this can relate to particular interpretations, for example, of the EA drought plan guideline, for example, interpretations on how much to integrate habitats regulation assessments and strategic environmental assessments that may be utilized in drought plan writing. And consultants as well playing a crucial role in advising water companies often on the drafting of drought plans and sometimes as well the Environment Agency. Further finding of our research is that relationships of influence in these networks can vary and that they can be situationally specific. So for instance, we've seen from our data as well that Natural England plays in some provisions of obstruction license and some decisions about the siting of drought permit sites a crucial role, but that in a whole range of other decisions in writing drought plans, it might be water companies and the Environment Agency who are more crucial in the drafting of it. So the second key overarching question that this part of the Marius project is concerned with is a question: how are governance and knowledges linked in preventing and managing drought in England and Wales? And so clearly preventing and managing drought involves to mobilize a range of resources, including legal rules and various forms of knowledges, such as scientific evidence and vernacular knowledges. And the key finding of the research is that governance arrangements and legal rules are not fixed and static and pre-given. So they're not a static framework just up there, but they're also actively made on the ground in the context of particular localities and in the context of specific regulatory decisions, such as the modification of water obstruction licenses. And finally, we asked the question, well, how innovative is the prevention and management of drought in England and Wales? And so we see that the regulatory framework is changing in relation to our changing understanding of increased drought risk. And to what extent should it be really changing as well? Jim made reference to the resilience duty as a fundamental key change that has occurred in the formal regulatory framework. The limitation of the exemptions from the obstruction licensing regimes due to come in January 2018, are another example of changes going on in the legal regulatory framework. And so what we see is that a range of legal provisions in relation to drought management operate on a macro level, addressing England and Wales. But what we see from our research as well is that there's variation according to the scale one looks at in terms of how stakeholders actually understand drought and what they think are appropriate ways for preventing and managing it. And there's more in Katharina's presentation on possibilities for innovative ways of involving a range of local stakeholders in drought management at the local river catchment scale. And so a further finding of our analysis is that in the last round of water resource management plans, innovation in dealing with drought occurred against the backdrop of path-dependent decision-making as well, in the sense of entrenched understandings of what drought actually is, in terms of it being a natural phenomenon, and in terms of a focus on a specific range of regulatory tools, such as temporary water use bans, drought orders, drought permits, and limited water sharing. So very quickly to finish off, I'd just like to show you an illustration of the range of outputs that this part of the MARIS project has generated. They include responses to government consultation exercises. They include the creation of new data sets, a range of outputs in terms of articles and forthcoming articles by Kevin Resch, who is as well there on the right-hand side of the slide. A book by Katharina on how to conduct transdisciplinary research, as well as a drought planning primer by Christina Cook, who gives an overview of key elements of regulating and planning for dealing with drought, and a special issue of a journal forthcoming that is arising from a workshop we organized last year in the Journal of Law and Policy. And just as a final conclusion, I'd like to draw to your attention two quotes from these different publications and outputs, which are intended as an invitation to delve into those writings, publications. And the first quote is that in England and Wales, levels of service which set out a company's service contract with its customers are the driving logic of drought plans, and more important, the driving logic also of regulatory tools of drought permits and drought orders. And the second quote suggests that it is critical to integrate the management of rivers in local and regional planning and decision-making, and also in drought planning. And on that note, I'd like to hand over to